Welcome back to another episode of A Mental Health Break with Vincent A. Lanci. I'm excited to launch another episode for you all. I'm Vincent Lanci, speaker and author of the book Left for Dead, A Story of Redemption. When I was 21 years old, I was the victim of a hit-and-run accident while walking home from a friend's birthday. After coming out of a coma and suffering from a traumatic brain injury, or you may know of as a TBI, I soon realized that it was time to put my mental health on a very high pedestal. This life-changing and transformative experience has led me to create a podcast that is all things mental health. Would it benefit you to hear from mental health professionals and influencers? Would it also add value to your life to hear real life and authentic stories from people talking about their mental health, the issues they face, and how they actively combat them? If you answered yes to any of those questions, you came to the right place. I want to start by congratulating you for making your mental health a priority. If you missed the last week's episode, be sure to download it after you tune in today. On this episode, I am happy to introduce my guest, Tony.alexander. I was introduced to Tony through my cousin Kim out in Louisiana, and I'm very grateful for the connection. He's a man full of great positivity and wonderful knowledge to help you all improve your mental health. So I'd like to now introduce Tony. Thanks for coming to my show.
All right. Well, one, thank you for having me. So just want to introduce myself as Tony Alexander, of course, raised and born in Louisiana. I spent about 10 years in the military, both active and reserve. In addition to that, over 15 years of leadership experience in the healthcare industry. And definitely grateful for having you having me here on this podcast. And in addition to being able to share some of my stories around my battles with mental health and, as you stated, putting it on that high pedestal and being the person that I was meant to be and reaching back out to the world. So thank you, Vincent, for having me.
I appreciate you coming on. There's many things I'm trying to achieve with this show. One also being the masculinity aspect with men speaking about their mental health, how for years it just wasn't a thing that people did. And now I'm trying to bridge that gap towards communication and helping others. So today, everybody, we have someone who's going to speak about their personal experience as well as a leadership experience. Although he's not a doctor, he is certainly an influencer. And Tony, before we get going on each episode, I share a mental health story of someone who is famous because I want to let you, all of the listeners, know that you are not alone. I want you to understand that even though someone looks like they are healthy from the outside, they may not be on the inside too. So today I will introduce the story of Justin Bieber. We all know who he is, but not many know the mental health side to his story. So here's some highlights I jotted down. In the article, he talked about how he became, in quote, the most hated person in the world due to, quote, a string of bad decisions in his 20s. He admitted his poor mental health may have been from abusing relationships and major drug use. These bad sections caused him to become distant to the people who loved him and valued him and thought he would never be able to turn it around. But he ended up taking a big break from his music, I learned, after canceling the final 14 dates of his 2017 Purpose World Tour and said, quote, I want my mind, heart, and soul to be sustainable. Tony, what'd you take away from that story?
Man, that is priceless right there. And, you stated something really earlier about the stigma around men and mental health. We don't talk about that enough. And that's one of the things I always say, it's okay, man. And not only that, but to check on our strong friend. And with that, one, I applaud Justin Bieber for taking that step and being able to step back. For me, the same concept, being able to disconnect and just, like we go to our physicians and get a checkup, we need to do the same for our mental health. And, again, applauding Justin for realizing that, he wasn't healthy on the inside. And so being healthy on the inside is just as important as being healthy on the outside, because one correlates to the other. So you're no good to yourself or others if you're not healthy on the inside, and that's mentally. So that disconnect is very, very important for us all, and not just on a yearly basis. That's what we talk about, an annual checkup, on a daily basis. So from that story, it's important to know that we're all human. So celebrity wise, whether, you're the ditch digger or whether you are in the healthcare profession, it's important, one, just to disconnect and take time for your own mental health. So while I never knew that about Justin, but appreciate you for sharing that.
Yeah, I've seen him in the news recently. I'm not too big on the tabloids, and that's something with some kind of medical issue. And it led me to finding this story. I thought it was important to share because someone who at one point was arguably one of the biggest male spotlight figures in the country, entertainment wise, someone who is battling all of these things. He is just like any of you listening on, very similar issues. So thanks for sharing all that, Tony. Now let's get into the main event. On each episode, my guest and I go over a series of 6 questions. My goal is to feature many valuable guests on this series, people talking about their mental health, doctors and influencers, because I want to deliver as much value to you all listening in as possible. So you ready, Tony?
I'm ready. Let's bring it. Let's
Let's
bring
do
it.
it. Let's do it. Many would agree that the more common or talked about types of mental illnesses are mood disorders, anxiety disorders, or schizophrenia disorders. What areas did you come across the most in your experiences?
I came across anxiety, and I would say it's more around generalized anxiety. And for me, it's actually something that I suffer from myself. The biggest thing about it is I've been able to put it in check, so to speak. But I can tell you that most Americans will suffer from some sort of anxiety. So it can go anywhere from being generalized to chronic. And I can tell you my first experience with anxiety was something that was very, I would call it traumatic. It was an out of body experience. I remember I called it a panic attack because I didn't want to call it what it was. I didn't know what was going on. It was frightful to feel like that you're losing your mind. The whole world stops and halts, and you're just in this disarray of constant worrying, anxiety, and fear, and those different types of things. I can remember standing in the middle of the store. I was at work actually, standing in the middle of the pharmacy, pretty much shaken, and everyone knew that this wasn't me. And the thing about it was I didn't know what was happening. Did I go to the doctor? No, not that day. Hey, I was just having a bad day, right? And I'm definitely not going to admit to my colleagues or my coworkers that I feel like I'm having a mental breakdown. But after a couple days and thinking about it and still not getting any better, still not getting any sleep, I did actually go to my primary care physician and speaking to him and kind of letting him know, hey, what was going on. His suggestion was that I see a therapist. And my thing of it was a therapist. Yeah. You grow up and you see Bugs Bunny laying on the couch, and you think of this whole this whole concept, right? So, I'm thinking I'm not going and lay on a couch in A, B, C, or D. But after some while, and still not explaining to my family what was going on, I took a little time off from work, and I went ahead and took my doctor up on his advice. And about 2 to 3 sessions in, and just speaking with the psychologist, just realized I had some under root causes that was causing that anxiety. And this wouldn't be the first episode of anxiety that I had. The other ones I just suppressed. And to that point, it really made it difficult for me to actually connect. But through, psychotherapy, learning good behaviors and those things, I was able to overcome. With that, I chose to share my stories with a lot of people that I mentor and explain to them, because I'm able to pick up on those signs now a lot easier. And for me, it didn't only make me a better person, but some years down the line, it allowed me to open that door and that conversation with my brothers and sisters and kind of talk about the different things, because generalized anxiety can lead to depression, and it did for me. So the anxiety, I have to say, is what I come across most. And with the pressures that society and social media places on us, it only increases that awareness around anxiety. And it creates actually a false sense of anxiety because you feel like, you got to keep up with the Joneses.
Mhm.
So you're doing, you're doing all of these extra things and you're adding
Absolutely.
pressure that shouldn't even be there. So that's the biggest thing for me. The generalized anxiety, I see it on a daily basis, and and the signs. I mean, the hand sweating for me was one of the signs. The palpitation. I mean, all of those signs. And when it comes on now, I know how to shut it down. So.
Absolutely. You mentioned that you started using your personal mental health stories with the people you mentored. What was that moment, to explain to our listeners, when you actually realized, hey, I'm going to actually start sharing my story because it's bigger than me?
It took a while. I'm not going to say, I was ready right off the bat or right off the cusp, but actually listening and thinking to these individuals that I'm mentoring, I'm thinking, one, I would be a hypocrite not to explain that, okay, these things have happened to me. But I'm also looking at the fact that they were going through these things. And not only that, based on the things that I knew that they had in their backgrounds in terms of family and genetics and those types of things, that it was possible that they would experience this one day in their lives. So look at them looking at to me as a mentor. It was my responsibility. So I would say as things progressed, I would begin to explain to them my battles. So as they came to me with different things and built that trust with them, I explained, look, hey, I know where you've been. I know what you're going through. These are my suggestions. I'm here for you. It's okay, man. It's okay to talk about it. It's not taboo. And once we remove the fact that talking about mental health, especially male mental health, off the
Yeah.
table, that we're going to be in a better place and a better society, and we won't see some of the things that we're seeing out there in the world when we lean on each other and make sure that we check on our strong friends. So that was the point, I would say. After about a year or so and getting myself together, I knew I had a duty to speak to my mentors about that, or my
Very
mentee.
admirable. Very, very admirable. So let's now piggyback off that idea. When did you first realize that a career relating to some form of mental health was the right career for you?
Well, I'm not going to necessarily say that I realized that the career was right for me. I'm going to say it chose me.
Love
That's kind of,
that. Love
yeah,
that.
it chose me. I'm just a people person in general. I love interacting. I love the leadership aspect. And I can remember working in the pharmacy and listening to the stories of the patients as they come through. And what dawned on me was a lot of the times these patients looked actually just like me. They were like just like me, and I'm thinking, oh wow, these patients are suffering from things that I go through, and not only that, they begin to open up their stories with me, and I felt it was only fair that I share it with them as well, right? So we built
Yeah.
this personal bond and this relationship, and it started off as something that was going to be an overnight job in the pharmacy that turned out to be 15 years later. And even after exiting and becoming an entrepreneur, I still keep in touch with the majority of these patients, and we talk through things, and we're on social media and we're checking on each other. But again, that career chose me, and not one day do I regret it, because I feel that I made a very positive impact in a lot of people's lives. And I think even with that, with these disorders, I saw people of all race, creed, color, religion. It didn't matter. Mental health doesn't, it's not biased, so it made it very real for me, because I would always think, man, some people just have it easy, right? And come to find out, hey, every now and then everyone needs a little bit health. Genetics are built in there. There's chemical imbalances. There's trauma that happens in your life. So you have to take all of these factors in there and understand. I can remember me first going to the pharmacy and saying, okay, so I have to take medication. Wow. So it was
Mm.
like the first most awkward thing in the world, right? And the doctor is telling me it's not going to be for long. It's just going to be for a little while. But I didn't want to take it at all, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But the thing about it was, I'm like, I dispense these every day. So I know the side effects. I didn't want the pharmacist to counsel me. I'm like, just give it to me. I'm going to go through the drive-through so no one sees it.
Mhm.
And, but after a while, I was proud to walk to the counter and say, you know what, I'm taking care of my mental health. I understand that I have a chemical imbalance. I have some things and some trauma that has happened to me. And, I explained that to my mentees. I explained that to my family now. It took years for my family to open up and talk
Yep.
about what had happened, or the things they were going through. And there was a time in my life where a lot of things had happened, and being that I didn't open up about my mental health, I just kind of withdrew. And when I say I withdrew, it was nearly about a month that I didn't leave my house. And after that, I was like, that's not okay.
Mhm.
That's not okay. So taking back and going through the therapy and actually taking the medications and those things actually brought me to a calm place. And then I began to instill healthy habits, meditation, devotion, and those types of things. And that's the story of how the profession chose me.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I also liked how you touched on some factors. There's a lot of things, whether it's genetics, a lot of things go into mental health difficulties. What advice can you give to our listeners today? Is that what may be considered a potential early sign that they may start to be developing a mental illness?
And there can be multiple, and I'll touch on some that maybe I see and some that I've experienced myself.
Yes, please.
uh, but definitely the withdrawal. So for me, I've always been an outgoing social person, and as this began to materialize, I just began to withdraw, and I didn't know the reason as to why,
Mm,
but
yeah.
I kept to myself, and I consider myself extroverted slash introverted at times, but I became very isolated to myself. In addition to that, again, I was out of character. I was very irritable. So there wasn't much that I could do or say, or people could do or say that would just kind of tick me off in a minute, right?
Yeah.
And I couldn't understand. It was just the little things, It's kind of one of those things, and your parents, you leave dishes in the sink.
Mm.
It was one of those situations there. But in addition to that, the constant fear and worry over the little things, I was a person that was a planner. I knew what the priorities were, but all of a sudden, everything started to become a priority for me. So, which of course, the worry would then equate to bad eating habits, then would
Yep.
equate to lack of sleep, or it would actually go the opposite. I would sleep for 2 and 3 days at a time. So those are the signs that you really should begin to look for. And as I think back on it, because again, my family and I, we never opened that conversation. They saw it, but no one ever pointed it out.
Yeah.
And not that to say, okay, hey, it's my family's fault, but it's like, wow, we never opened that door. And you saw me going downhill, and no one ever took the time to pull aside and say, hey, are you okay? you know?
Well, yeah, with the podcast, hopefully situations like that raise the awareness for things like mental illness difficulties do exist. So now maybe more people can be mindful in that situation for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely, because it's one of my biggest signs now that I do. Not only just that, especially with my family.
Yeah.
If we have this habit of checking in on Facebook or whatever the case may be, and I go days or a couple weeks and I don't see a post from one of them, hey, I check on my strong friend is one of my things, or it's okay, man. Because now we've opened that conversation and we know what each other, what we're going through and what we experience,
Hmm.
and we can feel that downward spiral and we're able to lift each other up right at the right moment. So
Yeah.
it's very important to open that conversation.
It is like a domino effect. I'd agree with you, where one bad habit can lead to others. While if you look at the other side of things, one good habit can also lead to others. So going off that, if you could pick three and only three, what would the three most important things our listeners can start to do on a short-term or daily basis to start improving their overall mental health?
I would say the very first thing is disconnect. You have to disconnect. And what I say about that is we live in a world that we're connected all the time. So from social media to our smartphones to our cars are connected now. I mean, just everything. We're so connected. And one of the things is we don't take that time out for quiet time. We need to have peace. So each morning, one of the things I do is I start off with meditation and a little devotion and just try to take that time to make sure that I ground and center myself before I begin my day. And just to backtrack on that a little bit, prior to it was go, go, go because I was worried. So it was like hopping out of bed, jumping in the shower, and taking off and starting my day, right? So it's like jumping in your car on a cold day, not letting it warm up and just taking off, right?
Yep.
So of course, eventually you're gonna cause some damage, and that's where we were there. Um,
I can
so
I can say
I
I'm
call
definitely seeing that too myself. I was always a go-getter. There's always a lot to do. I know there was a lot to do. And then eventually, you realize, especially after my traumatic brain injury, I went back to grad school. I was beating all these expectations as far as going back, but I was hard to accept my brain was any different because an invisible disease, I described the traumatic brain injury where you look at me, I look fine, but I didn't realize that my brain couldn't retain any of the information that I used to and had to rewire all my study habits. But the same thing with that. Just you reminded me of my story. Go getter. Now it's slow. I'm more routine to make the bed. As soon as I wake up, slow down. Try to ground myself, through meditation, or I definitely get my exercise in. But just inserting mental health breaks is kind of how I'm about my day now. I used to just take a few days off. Now it's every day I can do a little work, but I have to make sure I'm taking these breaks. You never want to take the breaks, but you have to. And when you come back, you feel so much better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I even set reminders on my phone.
Love
So
that.
there, yeah, just even a different couple apps I might use, daily affirmations, those types of things there.
Yeah.
Uh, and the other thing is openly talk about it. I mean, we have to put it back on the table, and talking about it is a key factor to help curb this stigma around, again, I'm going to say mental health, but mostly, male mental health. And I can remember posting on Facebook about, I was going to be on this podcast, and the overwhelming response from so many, basically saying so much necessary for men. So it really called us out,
It's one of the
right?
goals. I saw a few of your buddies have reached out to me. We will connect for sure.
Yeah. So it's a topic that really needs to be openly talked about, especially in a ever changing world. And when I talk about that, piggybacking on the first one, is just making sure that when I jump up in the morning, that social media is not the first thing I jump on. The television and CNN is not the first thing that I jump on, because there's so much other goodness happening in the land that if we feed our mind with the negativity, then it's going to create those different things, and it's going to feed those mental issues that we could have deep inside or dormant. So it's good to feed, you good food, good soul food is what I call it. So
Yeah, there's a lot.
definitely
There's a
that.
lot of garbage on TV nowadays. A lot of negativity. A lot of just things that at the end of the day are tearing things apart instead of uniting
Yeah,
anything.
there you
I
go.
try to be mindful of what I watch and they say what you eat, what you listen. You're 100% right on that. So those are great short-term things, great short-term initiatives. Now let's shift over to creating a more positive mental headspace on a long-term commitment side. What are some things you can recommend for us, Tony?
The biggest thing again is going to be one, constantly talking about it. We can't talk about it one time and say it's done, right? So we can't listen to this podcast and say I've done my part. So from a long-term perspective is definitely making sure that I keep it top of mind, and that the listeners making sure that they keep it top of mind as well, and make it an open conversation.
Yep.
I'm not going to say that it's easy to go and have a conversation and talk about, hey, this is how I'm feeling, because that's not how we're taught growing up, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, real men don't cry or those types of things there, but we hurt. That's the thing. We hurt. And so keeping the long-term commitment is to always be able to share my story to help others and keep the dialogue going from a long-term perspective, you know. And the other thing is, I like to call it a checkup from the neck up.
I like
So
that.
yeah, check up from the neck up. You have to do it, and it's so important. The long-term commitment for me, and I definitely would recommend to the listeners, is as you go into your primary care physicians, you're going in, whether you need to, you're having backaches or you're having trouble sleeping, those types of things. We're quick to tell them about those things that are going on, but have a real conversation with your primary care physician and let them know the other things that are happening. So, for me, it was truly my primary care physician that I will definitely credit a lot, because he was able to dig deeper into what was happening. He didn't automatically say, okay, here's some pills and you're going to feel better, right?
Hmm.
He began to dig a little deeper and root cause it and say, how are we going to fix the emotional part? Because if we don't fix that, then we'll go down this road of constant taking pills and those types of things. And that's where you look at the long term, where a lot of people don't realize that, even though you began taking medications for certain type of mental disorders, doesn't mean you'll be taking those all of your life, right? There's a way to cure it. So the self-care with the checkup from the neck up also means exercise, correcting your diet, those types of things. Because when I went through my spiral, I can tell you, I would have to ask myself, have I eaten today? And it would be 2 or 3 days and I wouldn't have eaten. I go buy a box of Boost and call it a day, because that's all I felt like. So just getting yourself on a regiment of exercise as well as eating healthy from a long-term perspective. Don't wait till a new year to decide I'm going to have a resolution. You need to have a revelation now and every day to ensure that you're being as fair to yourself and practicing self-care on a daily basis.
Absolutely. I could see the role the primary care physician played in your life as you're now delving into deeper ways to give back and spread your awareness. You're paying it forward. And as far as the pills, similar to me, after my accident, I got fed all these pills, blah, blah, blah. 2 years later, I start taking myself off these pills voluntarily because I see myself living in this cloud, this bubble where I didn't even realize I wasn't thinking clearly because it was all preventative stuff. And then having Klonopin before bed was all great and dandy for anxiety, but then once your script runs out, how you falling asleep? So I kind of said this will be a lifelong issue if I don't start finding more natural ways to attack my anxiety, because that's the one. I still do battle anxiety, but I just look for ways and find ways to mitigate the anxiety. But
Absolutely.
you're doing such great stuff, Tony, and all the advice was great today so far, and I know this will be too. So what awareness are you planning on building for raising mental health awareness? We already talked about how you do the "it's okay, man," to diminish the masculinity. What else are we working on?
So one of the things definitely is the starting point has been with this podcast as well. And I do plan on continuing to do more podcasts. I've also incorporated it in a lot of my mentoring groups, just bringing in different people that I'm affiliated with, healthcare physicians, to talk about mental health in some of the youth summits that I do. We actually have one coming up in Dallas around February 14th. It's actually called Black Men in White Suits or in White Coats. But we want to talk about the mental health there as well. So while there is a stigma, there is even more of a stigma in the African American community as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like strictly taboo, So with that as well, I'm beginning to continue to upskill myself on those types of the different mood disorders and mental health, creating literature. Also, I'm in the process of working on different blogs for XQ Institute that is a part of Lorene Jobs Powell. And with that, I'm going to include parts of mental health and the role of the caregivers in the in the foster care system. I do a lot of work with foster care. And one of the things that isn't addressed there is the mental health of the kids in care. So I'm definitely working with social workers on how to upskill them and ensure that they recognize the signs so that we can get help for the kids that need it, preventative before things get out of hand. So just a lot of projects on the table that I'm extremely proud of, and I'm going to make happen. So as things continue to develop, I'm going to make it happen, man.
I'm proud of you, man. I'm definitely looking forward to not only me, but everybody listening on follow your journey, because in a second, I'm going to ask you to share your social media and all that good stuff. But it's time for the last word, Tony. I do this on my other podcast, What It's Really Like to Be an Entrepreneur Too, because I want our listeners to really get to know my guests. Is there something that you want to share with everybody listening on that we didn't touch on yet today?
Well, what it's like to be an entrepreneur. Well, one, it's exhilarating, absolutely exhilarating, and liberating. But I can tell you it's a lot of work, but I wouldn't change it for the world, because it's truly a passion, and the ability to be able to go in and just have and pull so many skill sets that I have together, from a background in HR, background in employment law, healthcare, just to get the full package and be able to dabble in all that is phenomenal. So, if you're jumping in to become an entrepreneur, the average CEO works 60 hours a week. As an entrepreneur, I can tell you it's a lot more than that, but it's worth it. You just have to put in the time. So I love being an entrepreneur and writing my own narrative. So there's no complaints there. So.
Yeah, I mean, if I had everything happens for a reason. Some people are meant for the 9-to-5 pension, and that's fine. Neither right or wrong. If I had I've had several great mentors in my life, some of the best, still in great contact. But as far as in the workplace, a lot of things never fell into place the way I had wished for. But we all have learned that life doesn't really work out the way you anticipate. So, Tony, go ahead and share your social media, website, ways for our listeners to follow your endeavors or request your services.
Absolutely. So I can be reached at agent_for change on Twitter. On Instagram, I'm Measured Man, and that's because my life has been measured by many things. So everything has a meaning there. On LinkedIn, I'm actually Tony T. Alexander. And on Facebook, you will find me as SGI Services, and that stands for Structured Growth and Intentional Services. And that comes behind my military service and making sure that everything that you get from me is going to be structured, it's going to have growth, and it's intentional. So that's where you'll find me.
Yeah, I know everybody's definitely going to be interested to go check out your content after your great episode today. Everybody also remember to check out the show on Instagram and Facebook at A Mental Health Break and on Twitter at Podcasts by Lanci. I'm at Vincent A. Lanci on all social media and YouTube, and my website is vincentalanci.com. Be sure to check out my book, Left for Dead, A Story of Redemption, on Amazon now, but be sure to DM me or email me. I want to hear what you think. If you like today's episode, please continue listening and rate A Mental Health Break with Vincent A. Lanci 5 stars. I work hard to find value delivering stories for you on each episode. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you all in the next episode of A Mental Health Break with Vincent A. Lanci.